What is up, guys? Welcome back to the education series. So the last video that we dropped was a little bit off plan from the itinerary that we posted, but I felt it necessary just to kind of put in specifically how to program pull. So if you have any questions on that, please refer to that video. If you have your questions on how to specifically program push, refer to the first edition of the training video that we posted that covered the resistance profiles and whatnot, because in that I really heavily discussed how to set up push relative to a push-pull leg split. And then again, if you have questions on how to set up the legs version, that was in the leg training video. So I have now covered in detail how to set up pull, push and legs, or push-pull legs. One quick question that I kept getting consistently was, why is it always performed, in my opinion, push-pull legs? And the reason for that is I would never put pull before push, because pull would then be a detriment to your push session. I would find that you would stall with your push strength long before anything else. Sorry, it would come about much sooner. So putting it in the order of push-pull with those back-to-back sessions never saw a detriment to performance in the pull session. So that obviously then just makes absolute sense, because the goal over a period is to maximize your lift progressions in every single session. So now we're going to move on to kind of looking at the setup for split body part training, and kind of some of the various setups that I've tried, had success with. But I explained in the previous video that for me personally, I favored the push-pull leg split, and I kind of went into quite a lot of detail as to why that was one that was just always the best split for me. But by all means, it is not necessarily going to be the best split for you. And for some of you, due to a time factor consideration, you might not have a choice but to train a split routine. Like if you only have 45 minutes of gym access, realistically, you're only going to be able to train one, at a maximum 2 body parts in that session. But it might only be really 1.5, because you can't even really fully hit the second body part. So with that in mind, you have to train a split routine. So that could be the first reason why you're forced into it. The second could be that you struggle to think and focus over a longer period of training. So I know a lot of you posted that you can't do 2-hour training sessions. That's totally fair enough. For myself and all of my peers, a 2-hour training session is really normal. Like all of our sessions would be 1.5 hours at the minimum, and then most of them would be up to 2 hours. And then really, for some of us that are really strong, sessions would go 2.5, sometimes even 3 hours, which I know sounds crazy. And I know the first thing, as soon as I say that, you're going to be in the comment section saying, that's too long, that's too long. But I'm telling you now, that's not uncommon for leg sessions for a lot of big, strong guys. I do agree that it starts to drag on and you do feel it, but it's not uncommon. I'll put it that way. But 2 hours is a good kind of mark, and that's very consistent. But there were a lot of comments of guys saying that that's way too long for them, and that's totally fair enough, because again, train to your needs. So when that's the case for you, a split body part routine is going to make a lot more sense, because if you're in here and you get to the 1.5-hour mark and you start to flag mentally, that last half an hour is just going to be poor work. Like I've certainly found, since I've changed my goals, that it's harder for me to train for longer durations with weight sessions. Before, I was able to keep my focus no problem for 3 hours in a gym session. It literally wasn't an issue for me. Whereas now it is a lot harder for me to keep focus for a 2-hour session. And I much prefer something that's 1.5 hours, or even less. 1.25 hours now is probably my sweet spot for me personally. Because my goals are going to be more in line to now with a lot of yours, where it's just to look good, feel good, enjoy training. And so I can definitely understand that perspective. Whereas the previous me would have basically just told you to man up. So how are we going to set this split routine up? There are endless ways to set this up. This is the biggest example of there being no right or wrong way to set this up in terms of the order of sessions through the week, where you place your rest days, and then also the scope for the volume. I would say the split routine is probably why there is so much confusion and questioning what is the best way, because you'll see so many variations of this split. And the point that I just wanted to get into straight away was that do not overthink this if you are an individual that has to train as a split routine out of necessity. So if you're someone that is forced due to time scale, do not be overthinking, okay, does this have to be literally perfect in every way? Because you already don't have the luxury of it being perfect just because of your time availability. So with that in mind, then you definitely have to literally do what fits for you. And again, for some of you, there's just some days where you can't train as well. Some days of the week that are just inaccessible for you. So that's going to really dictate the certain session that you can do on that day. Like if there's one day where you do only have 40 minutes, it's probably going to be best that you do an arm day on that day, because it really doesn't take any warming up at all. You can just do 2 warm-up sets of a cable curl, and then the next thing you do is a working set. And within 5 minutes, you've already completed 2 work sets. So you're going to be able to rattle through that really quickly. And then if there is a day where you have a slightly longer day, then maybe you get an hour, that'll probably be the one that you do legs on. Or at the very least, that might be the one that you do quads, because that's probably going to be the most time-consuming session. So when I've done this in the past, I haven't gone over 5 days of training a week when it's been on a fixed week-to-week schedule. I've never trained 6 days a week. I've never been able to do that. So if some of you can and you enjoy that, again, keep going. There's no need to change. But I personally was never able to do that. And I also wasn't really able to sustain 5 day a week training for very long, because 5 day a week training when it's on a week-to-week setup, consistently would be 3 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. But for me, when it came to the 3 day on, by the end of the 3rd day, I was always flagging. Always. And that was a real issue for me. But how my initial favoured split routine is set up has something that I call the density day. So this is what we're going to cover in this video. We're going to cover the density day split setup. So how that looked, that would be a chest focused push session on the Monday. It would be legs on a Tuesday. It would be non-lower back loading pull work on a Wednesday. Be rest on a Thursday. It would then be a shoulder focused push session on a Friday, and it then would be a density day session on a Saturday. Now, if I was going to do 5 day a week training with a split body part routine, and I had time availability and my recovery was good, and I didn't have huge glaring weaknesses in my physique, this would be the setup I would choose. I believe this to be a really effective way to get in good amounts of frequency and days that can be dedicated to just certain movements, which I kind of alluded to in the pull session. Is going to be important to build muscle in certain areas. Like for me, the goal was always to have a ridiculous back. So then my training kind of always roughly focused around that, just because it was something that I really enjoyed training, and I knew that I could get very, very big and strong. So mine kind of evolved around that. If that's a goal of yours, then again, you can look at this setup. If the goal is huge legs, which obviously was my goal as well, you can just tweak the exercise selection slightly, just as an example. So how that looks in terms of volume is, again, going to be hugely dependent on your recovery across the week and how one session knocks into the next few sessions. So for example, between your Monday push session and your Friday push session, for that one you get 4 sleeps. So for that one, you can push the volume at the exact same level that you you would have been doing in your push-pull leg split setup. That's no problem to do that same level of volume. However, on the Friday session, you're only going to get 3 sleeps until you roll back around into Monday's push session again. And the problem with that, and I keep calling them push sessions because that's how I like to approach them, because I cluster compound movements together as per my push setup, and I like to just get them all very strong. So yes, like Mondays would be chest focused and Fridays would be shoulder focused, but for me they're still push sessions, so that's just how I describe them. But for ease, I can call them chest and shoulders, just so it's maybe not as confusing. So you're only going to get 3 sleeps between your shoulder session and your chest session. So you want to be very careful how much work you do in that Friday session that then doesn't over demand your recovery from your pressing muscles again on the Monday. And this is something I see a lot and really holds people back from getting really super strong, which then will determine how big you get, provided that your external stimulus equates to the increase in internal stimulus. I'll kind of chuck that caveat back in every video I do. I've mentioned it a lot now in this series, so I know for you guys that have been following the videos all along, you'll be 100% aware of what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I really advise you watch the other videos, because we've kind of built this as we've gone. So I know that if someone's watched all of the videos, they will understand every single aspect of this video, and then be able to take away more and more from each video as they've gone along. So the body part that can handle frequency and volume the least is our upper body pressing muscles. They cannot be trained at high frequency and high volume. And really, once you start to get strong, they actually can't even be trained at low volume and high frequency. They then can only recover every 4 to 5 sleeps, even on low volume work. I've experimented with that extensively, not just with myself, but with clients that are strong, and found that to be a really similar case. And then equally, when I've looked at high-level powerlifters, their ability to, just as a reference, in terms of strength and then ability to progress lifts, high-level powerlifters aren't benching at high frequency. It's very rare for that to be an occurrence. And that's simply because just you can't recover from that frequency with those muscles. Whereas your upper back can, your quads can. Like, they have higher recovery capabilities for a little bit more frequency. And then your side delts and your biceps really can. They can recover from tons of frequency. And then your calves and your abs, it almost feels like that they can recover from everything and anything that you do to them. So we have kind of this continuum, which means that we need to be very aware of what we expose ourselves to volume-wise relative to the number of sleeps that we have. So that's the first thing to look at. But obviously on that Monday session, you're going to pick your movements that bias your chest the most, and you're going to do the volume appropriate to that. But I would still always include some side delt work and some tricep work in that session, because you get 4 sleeps until you push again. So that's the one that always wants to be slightly heavier in the total amount of work. The Friday session, you're going to pick your shoulder movement as your main movement. I would still expose it to some chest work, but probably only 1 exercise, because like I said, you only get 3 sleeps. And I'd probably do something that causes it really minimal damage and fatigue. So something that doesn't necessarily overload it massively in the lengthened position, because again, like I've mentioned a lot, that's what accumulates loss of fatigue in the muscle. So what I'd probably be doing is like a cuff cable fly, something like that. Something that has very little resistance here and tons of resistance here, which means then the recovery demands from it are minimal. Or if you have a prime pec deck, you can then put that on a setting, like setting 4, that then overloads the shortened a lot and doesn't the lengthen. I wouldn't be doing hard compound movements that overload the lengthened in that session, because I absolutely guarantee that you will not recover from them for your pressing again on a Monday. And the problem is that if this is what you've done from the beginning, you won't even realize that you're not recovering, and you'll think that your strength is just your strength, whereas actually you'd be a hell of a lot stronger if you understood how to program. And again, this is one of the things why I'm so keen on focusing on that volume to frequency relationship, because to me it's the absolute be all and end all to getting super strong. And then again, we'll mention again, if the external stimulus equates to the internal stimulus, you're going to get massive. It's as simple as that. And then also in the process, you understand when to expose yourself to those lower rep ranges that might cause more injury risk, and when you can go at them to really drive your strength. These are all factors that play a large role. So the leg session on this setup, again, is entirely fine to have the identical volume to the push-pull leg split. So again, watch the legs training video, take away the exact volume setup that I said for that. Now the back session on the Wednesday, that's fine to have the volume that's in the pull session, but I would do no lower back loading at all in this session. It's just not a need for it. And simply as well, because you've trained legs and back to back with legs first, you're going to be fatigued going into that back session. So I would then really focus on making sure you're super accurate with your exercises that overload in the shortened position, and that this is the one way maybe you're doing like single arm cable pull downs and single armed machine rows where you're just being super accurate. You don't want to be doing heavy bent over movements in this session at all. So when I say no pulls from the ground, I would also, and no low back loading, like I wouldn't even do a barbell row. Like I wouldn't do anything in that sense. The only movement that you could do to bump up your low back loading frequency is the dual bent over dumbbell row. And I made a post on my Instagram about that. That's how to load your lower back without loading your lower back, basically. So read that post and I explain that there. But it's, in short, it's because the dumbbells you're bending over with are only going to ever be like 60, 65 kilos at most, maybe 70 kilos if you're really strong at that movement. I think the most I ever went up to was like 70s. And I don't think I've seen anyone, so like 150 pound dumbbells, I don't think I've ever seen anyone doing more than 150 pound dumbbells on that movement. I'm sure some people have just chucked them around like idiots, but with proper execution, it's not a lot of weight to be bending over with at all, really, is it? Because when we think it's not even 3 plates on a barbell, it's nothing. So that's like the perfect movement if you did want to bump up your lower back loading frequency. So like I said, on the Friday session, I would only train the chest in the shortened position, and I would do the same for the triceps. I would keep my volume pretty low in the triceps, and I'd only be looking to do kind of like single-armed cuff push-downs. But I would blitz the hell out of my lateral work. And I would be more than happy to do some decent overhead pressing. Like in that session for me, in the past, I typically stuck on 4 sets of compound work, and that was it. But it would be kind of 2 high incline press movements. I remember when I was at my absolute biggest in 2018, I used to start on a hammer strength shoulder press first, and then I did a high incline Smith second. I started with the hammer strength because that overloads the shortened the most. So always start with the hammer strength piece, and then don't do too much work on the hammer strength piece if you don't have the ability to adjust the resistance profile like you do on a prime piece. So then I would get off the hammer strength, and I would then do the Smith press, which has an even resistance profile. That allowed me to be strong on both. I remember at my absolute strongest in one of those sessions, I did 5 plates aside on the hammer strength shoulder press for 15 reps. And then I got on the high incline Smith and did 4 plates aside after that for 12 reps. And that was like all-time peak strength for me. And that was where, again, in the rear double bicep, you could see my front delts from behind, like really clearly in that pose, because that whole upper shelf was just so developed from that setup. So that was really super effective to come in and just hammer that top shelf. That was a very, very effective one. Now, the setup for the density day, we're actually going to do an entirely separate video just focused on the density day itself. And you can call this whatever day you want. I like density day because this day will make you super dense, basically, because it's a day that just evolves around lower back loading, essentially, with then a bit of extra quad and hamstring work chucked in for frequency, because you can. And if you're hitting legs at twice a week frequency, they're going to grow pretty well. So from a growth potential perspective, this split really sets you up to grow, because you're training body parts at even higher frequency than just the push-pull leg setup, and you're focusing days on just individual things that they need. So you basically have just a chest day, you basically have just a shoulder day, you have basically just a lat and upper back day, and then you have a day just to do bent over movements. It works very, very well. And you're going to build a lot of muscle. And I was undoubtedly my absolute biggest when I was able to string together a period of recovery that allowed me to do this split. I stepped forward so much in that 2018 period with size. What was really interesting was that when I tried to revisit that split on multiple occasions in 2019, 2020, 2021, I couldn't recover from it. So that shows the inter-individuality of your recovery capabilities. And I couldn't pinpoint why. I revisited my exact same volume, my exact same exercises, my exact same drug use, my food, everything. But for some reason that I couldn't actually pinpoint, so it would have been more external factors. Like, well, I could pinpoint it. We launched our supplement line in 2019. My work needs rocketed dramatically. So then even things that you can't control, just your subconscious demands mentally, were just way too high for me, and I couldn't at all recover from it. Whereas in 2018, I didn't have so many commitments. I didn't have a warehouse, I didn't have staff, I didn't have all of these additional demands that then really dictated my recovery. So I know full well that that makes a massive difference. But if you are just a bodybuilder that has focus on just being a bodybuilder, you will be able to recover from a lot more. Whereas we know that if you are someone that has kids, a stressful job, time constraints, it's not only going to limit what you can do in terms of those time slots, it'll hugely limit what you can and can't recover from as a whole. So this is our look at my favoured way to do a split body part routine, which again we'll just recap in essence is chest, legs, back, rest, shoulders, density day. And like I said, we're going to do a follow-up video where we just focus on the density day. So if you have any questions for any of the kind of topics, because I've covered a lot of broad topics again in the video just to try to kind of reinforce certain ideas, and then for those that haven't watched any of the videos previously, give you small introductions into things that you can learn a huge amount about if you start from the beginning and you work yourself through. So hopefully that's helpful, guys, and I will see you very soon.